my ask of Sam and my plea here is not that we don't engage. I think there's nothing wrong with what Sam's doing in terms of engaging with the government, and I support various people and groups that do this. I'm sympathetic to those who have the view that any engagement is bad. Like I'm sympathetic to that, but I think the Hydra approach of everything from the most radical crypto anarchy to people in suits going to meet with those in Mordor, or I mean in DC, that they would all be effective in some ways, right? So that, yeah, I want to be super clear that that's not my ask here. What my ask is that people like Sam who are engaging be very careful about what they ask for and where they draw the lines, and those specifics are critical. And I think Sam agrees with that point.
So, Eric, what other specifics did you take issue with in Sam's original post? I mean, there's a lot of places we could take this. We could talk about DeFi. We could talk about kind of code. I know there are some points that you do agree with, but let's focus on maybe the deltas here and the disagreements. Aside from the overarching kind of like concept of respect for OFAC, for instance, there were some other like practical things that Sam proposed. What would you point out? What are things that you don't agree with?
Yeah, and I'll start this by also saying something that I did agree with and like. Sam has had a very creative suggestion for how exchanges should handle hacks and like trying to create a standard or a protocol for that. The specifics aren't super important, but that he was trying to do that, I think was great. And that being done as a set of industry standards is laudable. So well done there. Certainly the biggest area of contention, both with my own response to Sam's post and with the crypto community at large, is what Sam was saying about DeFi. And I'll try to characterize Sam's position correctly here. He was clear that at a protocol level, things need to remain open and immutable. So that's good. Where he made the big mistake is in suggesting that interfaces for decentralized protocols, such as the front end website of something like Aave or Uniswap, should perhaps be regulated as a financial institution. That line cannot be crossed. That line should not be crossed. And if we spend the rest of this discussion on this point alone, I think that would be valuable. My main ask of Sam in these discussions is that however important it is to regulate centralized custodians or intermediaries correctly, that the current bill, the DCCPA, trying to do that and doing that well is understandable. If regulations in this same bill get attached to how decentralized products, i.e. non-financial intermediaries, are handled, that is going to be a big mistake. It's going to be done incorrectly, it's going to be done poorly, and it's going to harm America more than it harms the actual protocols themselves. So if I can make any request, it's simply to not include any concept of decentralized finance into a bill which is centrally trying to govern well central controlling intermediaries.
Sam, what would you say? And Eric, are we talking just about the protocol, or are we talking about the user interface? I know Sam had some propositions around that, the user interface that connects to DeFi applications. Is that sort of one and the same to you?
Yeah, so Sam was clear that the protocols shouldn't be regulated, so that's good. But he was suggesting that interfaces to these protocols should be regulated similarly to how a centralized intermediary under the Bank Secrecy Act would be regulated. That is the big line that we need to say no on. So Sam, did I characterize that correctly? And what are your thoughts currently?
I think that's basically characterized right. And I think I like one thing I did take a little bit of, and by the way, I like, I'm not sure you're wrong, to be clear on this. Like I think it's a complicated question. I don't fucking know what the right answer is for. I think that like I think you did characterize, I think, basically right. And I really appreciate that you sort of have put the thought into to make sure that you do that. I don't think everyone does that on either side. One thing that they do just want to note is like, and I think you're not your first or your third, but in your second description of what I think, you sort of said that that you think it's important that decentralized applications not be regulated, and I think that they should be, or something roughly like that. And I think that your first and third versions did clarify roughly correctly what I think, but I think the second version sort of blurred a little bit the lines between like a decentralized protocol and well, at the very least, and for instance, a centrally hosted GUI. And so I just want to make it clear that like I do draw a distinction there. And then I think a lot of the discussion on Twitter failed to remember that distinction, even if it was pointed out periodically. And so I want to make sure that we keep that pretty clear and that we not sort of like drift back and forth about, what it refers to. So I don't know for sure what the right thing to do is here. One thing I will say is, well, first of all, again, we don't know what DCCPA will say. Don't have the final text yet. I do not think that we should be trying to hash out a lot of DeFi regulation in DCCPA. I think for most of the reasons you said, this is like, first of all, a lot of this is just permissionless code. And second of all, it's just a tricky area in general. And those are two recipes for disaster on trying to just quickly cobble together a comprehensive regime for DeFi. And I don't think, although we'll see, that the DCCPA is going to be aimed at trying to put together a regulatory framework for DeFi. I think and hope that it will be quite light touch on that side. And that to the extent that it does reference DeFi, at least in prior drafts that have been released, most of that was actually centered around something else, which was if there is a broker-dealer, if you have like Schwab or something, and it wants to access DeFi for its customers, what should the principles around that be? And I will say that thing, I actually feel like pretty good about. I mean, sorry, there are mixed parts of this, but I think like overall, like, trying to create ways for highly regulated, centralized financial intermediaries to interface with permissionless DeFi is like probably good and healthy and like will open up a lot to DeFi. And that like so that part, like the devil's in the details there, and I don't know exactly what it's going to say, but I think it's potentially exciting and healthy. But putting DCCPA aside for a second, because it's like, I think in particular on the DeFi part, it's not clear exactly what it will say. And so it's going to be hard to hash out thoughts on it exactly. Maybe just drilling into the place where I think we probably at least somewhat disagree, which is on the GUIs. Maybe I'll make it a few points here. The first is that there are some blurred lines here. Like, and I'll acknowledge that like some things I've said, but I think it's sort of like forgotten about those blurred lines and treated as if there was like crystal clear differentiation between different parts of this, which doesn't exist. But I think that the most important thing by far, and I'm interested if you disagree with this, but my instinct is that by far the most important thing is, or set of things is the following, that protocols can be permissionless, that on-chain code can be permissionless. Sorry, the only reason I'm saying can be here is that it's permissionless to write it, and obviously you could write on-chain code and put permissions in it. We shouldn't make that illegal. But that should be permissionless to write coding, and that code can be permissionless. And that like peer-to-peer transfers and payments can be permissionless. Like those are things that I think are like incredibly important and fundamental here. And I think that like if those are violated, like I think those are sort of the sacred things, because if those get violated, I think it just breaks the whole thing. Like it's like, and by the way, I think it's true, by the way, for TradFi too. If you try to say everything is permissioned, no one could go to a shopping mall anymore. Like you could not buy food. Like the world would just starve the next day. So and I think that like the result of that would be to like effectively ban digital commerce and say that like the only unregulated commerce can be physical unregulated commerce. So, but anyway, I want to check if you agree, not with my statement that I think that they should be permissionless, but with my claim that that's the most important thing by far.
Yes, I think I agree with that.
Cool.
I take a little issue with your point about the current payment system not being permissionless, like, or being permissioned. Like today, it is absolutely permissioned. That you can go with your credit card and buy something at the store is only because several intermediaries have your box ticked as approved, right? That is permissioned, and that can be taken away from people for wrong think or for anything that, you know, some Orwellian government wants to do to them.
Oh, sorry. I think what I'd say is parts of it are permission and parts of it aren't. And I think it's totally arbitrary which parts are and aren't. And I think that I agree with you on the parts that are. Like, sorry, you can go to a store and you can pay with a credit card or with a dollar bill. And one of those is intermediated.
Cash is permissionless, right? That's the last bastion there.
That's right. And I think that, like, and I do think that, by the way, I think you're making a good point here, which is like, when you go to a store and you buy a bagel, it costs 2% to a payment processor. And that's if you're allowed to buy the bagel, right? That's if you have connectivity to the financial system. Now, you can buy it with cash either way, I guess, but cash is a pain. And why does it cost 2%? I think a lot of that is because, like, you're trying to get like gigantic companies to zoom in and say, like, Alice wants to buy an everything bagel with cucumber. What do we think about that? And it's like, that's fucked. Like and like, that's where that 2% is going effectively, right? That 2% is going because you're trying to mediate like that transaction. And as you said, like, not everyone has a credit card and credit cards don't always work. And so that 2% fee is the good case. That's the case where the payment does work. So I agree that, like, a lot of the fact that payments are screwed up today is because of this. So anyway, in terms of so it seems like we agree on what the most important things are and agree on what to do about those most important things. For where we disagree, here's my argument, and my argument might be wrong. Like, I don't feel 100% sold by my argument here. I on balance currently think it's correct. But basically what it is that, like, is like, look, like, you know, given, she's taken as a given that is the most important thing, that smart contracts, that code, validators is another thing I should have thrown at that, which I assume you agree with, that it's very important that validators can be permissionless, or else again, you have like 10,000 random people running code to validate mathematical transactions and also think about everything bagels with onions at 7-Eleven and Alice, which is insane. But anyway, so on, and maybe I'll say, just to clarify, I make it explicit, a website hosted on a centralized service by an American that targets financial products at American retail, back-ending onto DeFi, but is non-custodial. And so it's not custodying, which I'm guessing is maybe where you would be drawing this line here.
No, non-custodial. So let's use a specific example, like a US hosted, US owned front end for Aave.
Yep, which is, to be clear, in this case, US hosted, US owned, and offered to Americans. And sorry, offered to Americans is a vague word, but like, I sort of want to say, like, isn't IP blocking the US or something like that? And like, I don't know, there's lots of interesting details here about that. But like,
the question is, should an American need a license to offer a front end for a backend DeFi protocol like Aave?
Yeah,
your blog said yes.
And sorry, just want to clarify, and it offered to Americans.
Correct. So, to Americans.
Yeah. So I want to sidestep for a second, so we can get back to it. The question of whether I think, if I were dictator, that should be required. And rather answer a question of what policy should we be proposing and arguing for? And my core thought here is the following, which is that I claim that the most important thing here, at the end of the day, the most important thing is that smart contracts, validators, payments remain open and free. And that the most important thing is that gets protected at all costs. And that because of that, like, I am relatively willing to accept compromises if they preserve the things that I believe have the vast majority of the value for DeFi. And I and that plays a non-trivial part in my thinking here, which is that first of all, like if my best guess, my projection is let's just expand out 10 years from now. And say, what will empirically in expected value terms regulation look like for DeFi in the United States for with all these caveats again, Americans offering to Americans, blah blah blah. If I had to guess, I would guess in expected value terms that it looks worse than it does in a world in which it's like validators, smart contracts, payments totally free, but in which the centralized American-hosted targeting Americans of a GUI requires a broker-dealer license or something like that. Like my projection is that that world is better than the expected value of what the world will be. Maybe I'll just pause for a second there and ask you, do you agree with that statement about the relative expected values?
I think the tendency of the regulators is to make the world a darker place, no matter what. Now, it's up to non-regulators. It's up to you, Sam. It's up to people in the industry to highlight the reasons, whether ethical, moral, legal, why those people should not be imposing the controls that they want to impose. And I agree that the protocol being immutable is the most important thing, but I kind of feel like you're starting to compromise far too early. Just as in the same way that, like, if we agree that the heart or the brain is the most important part of the body, we would not so readily surrender our arms and our legs to be chopped off just because the heart may be arguably more important, right? Like, let's keep the whole being here. Let's not invite in this kind of restriction. And if they force the restriction, then they'll force it, and history will be the judge of that. But let's not be the ones who invite that in upon ourselves.
So I totally hear you. I want to make an empirical claim, which it might be wrong. And if this claim is wrong, then I change my position on some of this. But my empirical claim is the following. Maybe I'll sort of like lay out my logic here. Step one, most important thing, validators, etc. Step two, I predict that in expected value terms, that compromise is better than what we will get. Maybe it'll be better, maybe it'll be worse, but like it's better than what we're expected to get because it preserves the most important thing. And I'm not 100% sure that that will be preserved. I really hope it will be. Step three, I think we have to fight to make sure it gets preserved. I think that's the most important fight. And then step four, and I think this is an important and non-trivial step that I might be wrong about, but which is very relevant for my thinking on this, is my sense is that it is much more effective at getting what you want the most if you come to the table with a stance which is immediately recognized as willing to compromise and reasonable. And that's I'm not yet making a statement about what matters or what the right thing to do is, but that like my belief is that like if you come to the table in DC and ask for exactly everything that you want as your first ask in a very forceful way, you'll not get what you want, and that you will not be taken as seriously, and that the way to maximize the odds of getting what you want the most is to express a willingness to compromise on the things that are less important. That is a belief of mine.
In principle, that's absolutely right. You're not wrong on that principle, but you're sacrificing far too much from our position here. Let's be pragmatic for a second. Forget all principles and everything. If DeFi front ends catering to Americans need to be licensed, DeFi in America dies. It dies. People will not use DeFi through licensed front ends because it will simply look like CeFi. There will be no meaningful distinction.
So
that can't be sacrificed.
Well, I think I disagree with that, but I more strongly disagree with at least one of the things you said, even if I don't know which one. Like, in other words, I don't know that you can simultaneously think what you just said and also think that by far the most important thing is that validators etc., remain permissionless. Like, because what you're saying right now is you lose the whole thing if you give up permissionless front ends. And but then you also said that you get most of the value if you have like permissionless backends. And so I think I'm now confused about which of those you think.
If you gate the way that people use DeFi, 99% of people use DeFi, which is through a GUI. If you gate that as a licensed financial institution, you have turned DeFi into TradFi.
And so just to clarify then, like the sense I'm getting now is basically that you think that like the front end is just about as important as the back end. That like, you know, if you, for instance, had to like if you got like 70-30 odds on like which was permissioned and which was permissionless, you'd be kind of like, I'll just take whichever gives me the 70%. Like I kind of think it's about equally important. Like, is that kind of how you're thinking about this?
I'm thinking of this from the perspective of actually wanting the entire world to be able to use an open, immutable financial system. And 99% of those people use GUIs. So if you gate the access to permissionless blockchains with GUIs that need financial regulation on them, we've failed. Like we end up with TradFi.
I feel confused about whether you agree with my statement. I feel
what am I missing?
Sorry. I think I'm not trying to, I know what you think the best case is here. I know what you think the worst case is here. I guess what I'm trying to say is like, is an intermediate case closer to the worst case or the best case? Like if you have a case. This is
the intermediate case. My best case is that governments leave free sovereign individuals alone to interact economically as they will, like the country was supposed to be founded on. But that is a radical notion that no one in Washington accepts anymore. Granted.
Sure. So sorry. So if you take, of the following three cases, granted that there are many cases beyond these three, but of the following cases, case one, all of DeFi and things related to DeFi are unregulated. Case two, back-end unregulated, front-end, centralized front-end regulated. Case three, back-end regulated, centralized front-end regulated. Do you think case two is closer to case one or case three?
I think it's closer to case three.
Got it. So you think that basically, like, if anything here requires oversight, that that you've lost most of the value.
I think we need to move the conversation up a level and acknowledge that the oversight in DeFi already exists, and it's done by immutable code that operates perfectly as written. It has oversight.
Sorry, right? I agree. Oversight from a human-based financial regulator in the government.
Why do we want to invite that?
I'm not making an argument about whether I think it's good or bad. What I'm saying is, and maybe you dispute that we have to choose because maybe you think that like it is fairly likely that we end up in a world in which there is no human regulatory oversight of anything related to DeFi. And if you think that that's an interesting belief, which is not my belief, but which like would be very interesting to me if you thought it was true.
There's already human oversight over these things. Fraud is already illegal. Theft is already illegal, right? It doesn't matter if I do it through a DeFi smart contract. If I steal from someone, that's regulated already.
Sorry,
right?
I hear you. Okay, I feel like we're being a bit pedantic here, but I will go with the flow and I will like add a lot of words to this sentence. But I think you know what I'm trying to ask, and I'd appreciate it if you ask the question you know I'm trying to ask. So, is your belief that if any part of the flow by which many people currently access DeFi, in which you go to a American human-hosted website aimed at Americans, hosted on AWS, paid for with a credit card, that then backends onto Aave in a non-custodial way, that if any part of that requires an explicit license from a government financial regulator, that already means we're close to the worst case in absolute value, and that like it's not worth that much to talk about which parts of it do and don't require a license, because if any of them do, it's already sort of like you've already lost the basically the whole war. Is that roughly what you think?
Yes. I think if
Okay.
that is the outcome, then none of us should be proud of anything that we've been doing to build this whole industry. The entire point, the entire point of this is open permissionless finance. And when we say that, it is not just a slogan, it is the entire point. And if you exclude 99% of people from open permissionless finance, then all you've done is make a more complicated, more expensive TradFi system, right?
So
That's not acceptable to me, and I think to most of the people that care about why we're doing this in the first place.
I think I disagree with your last statement about exactly how it's acceptable to or not. Although maybe I also think maybe it would be if it was phrased the way you phrased it. But um, I but okay. I think I now understand your view here. And your view here. Tell me if this is right or wrong. But my understanding now of your view here, roughly speaking, is that and I think I understand why my previous question didn't get at this, and sorry for that. I now think your view is roughly speaking, um, that if anything in this process requires a financial license, then that means that the people, so to speak, won't be able to access it, as that means we've already lost. And that
Yes, just
like
just as if we were having this discussion 25 years ago when the web was being created and we were taking these same positions and you were asking me if any part of the web stack that lets someone log onto a web browser and access something as powerful as the entire tome of human knowledge like Wikipedia, if any part of that required a license, would we have lost the battle? Yes. Yes, the web would not be the beautiful thing that it is today. The reason that it is so special, the reason that it is so innovative, the reason it's so dynamic is because people do not need permission to access the web, to read to it, to write to it. And it's amazing that that has lasted. And anyone who researches the history of the web knows that these very same battles and discussions and debates happened back in the 90s. It would be the height of irony if crypto entrepreneurs then gave up that very same argument 25 years later and allowed finance itself, which is no more dangerous than information, to become a permissioned system.
so uh okay, I hear you. I hear your point here, and um I have a lot of empathy for it. I think it's like um uh I think that there is a totally plausible argument to be made here, which you're making, that yeah, that like any amount of um uh if anywhere in this process we're requiring a license, then in practice, the worry is basically in practice, no one's gonna be able to access it. And that
In
like
practice, it's no longer an open financial system. You've lost that. So if you're okay with losing that, if you're okay with having a closed permissioned financial system, then we see things very differently.
so I guess I don't see things in binary. Like I guess what
Neither do I.
I would that felt like a very binary statement.
It's a statement of a line. It's a statement that if we cross this line, we've lost permissionlessness, which is the entire point.
But I don't think permissionlessness is binary. Like I think that there are shades of gray here, and that you're sort of sweeping that a little bit under the rug, and that like the real answer is that like I think there are costs to losing this line. Um, but I also think that like that doesn't mean that you've lost everything. I think that like in particular, sorry, maybe be more explicit here. I think that if you end up in a position where I where um like if you end up in a position where it's licensed to deploy a smart contract or to interact with a smart contract with code, that puts a gear in the works that is very difficult to overcome. Like I think then you just get like on-chain stuff just doesn't work. Like it just like you
We
can
agree
no
with
longer
that.
yeah, so we agree on that statement. And so So on that side, I think I feel maybe somewhat similarly to your sort of sense of like, that sort of like it's very difficult to find ways to mess with that don't break the whole thing. I think I don't feel nearly as strongly about the thing I said. So I think that like if what you're saying is that an American hosted GUI aimed at American retail, hosted in a centralized way on a centralized cloud server, requires some sort of financial licensure. I don't think that basically breaks DeFi. Like, and I think there are a lot of reasons that I don't think it does. I think that like, I think that like, thinking through like okay, like what impact does that actually have? Like, well, I guess like,
I mean, I can make this very practical. If a
yep,
company needs to be licensed and do KYC to operate its American front end for Aave,
yep,
that company now has a compliance program. That company has registered in a certain jurisdiction. That company is now taking personally identifiable information from millions of users and storing it. There is nothing decentralized about that model. That is a centralized model that is endangering people with custodianship. That is TradFi. That is not DeFi.
To continue leveling up your crypto game, then you need to get on the Bankless newsletter. It's the world's most popular crypto email and is completely free. Just click below to sign up.